and welcome to this event. I'm Gi-Yuk Shin, Director of Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this kickoff event of our center seminar series this quarter, exploring APEC's role in facilitating regional cooperation. So with this series, we'd like to gain fresh perspectives on the future of regional cooperation as the United States takes the stage as this year's host of Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Established in 1989, APEC stands committed to fostering cooperation across various thematic areas within the region, with a current emphasis on nurturing sustainable economic growth and prosperity. The three APEC 2023 U.S. priorities are as follow, and then emphasizing three I's. So I'll give you a quiz later. What are those I's? So one is building a resilient and interconnected. The first I, interconnected region that advance broad-based economic prosperity. The second, establishing an innovative. The second I, innovative environment for a sustainable future. And third, forming an equitable and inclusive, third I, future for all. So I can say interconnected, innovative, and inclusive. So during the week of November 12th, at the APEC leaders meeting in San Francisco, ministers, leaders from 21 APEC member economies and over 1,000 private sector executives and delegates from across the Asia Pacific will converge and explore avenues for collective action to advance these priorities and address regional challenges. I'm very happy to have our autumn quarter seminar series to complement these discussions. So we have 4 seminars, including today. The second one, October 18, third on November 1, and the last one, December 5th. So please check our website. And then I'm very grateful to our committee, led by Tom Finger, to organize the seminar series this quarter. I'm thrilled to open the series with a panel on APEC's role in the evolving Asia-Pacific order today, featuring top-notch experts to share their insights into this topic. Our panel moderator today is APAC visiting scholar Michael Beeman, a former assistant U.S. trade representative for Japan, Korea, and APEC at the Office of U.S. Trade Representative, or USTR. In that role, Michael led the renegotiation of U.S.-Korea FTA and the U.S.-Japan trade agreement, among many other things. After joining the U.S. government in 1998, last century, right? He served in many capacities at the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Executive Director to the World Bank, and USTR. So Michael holds a doctorate in politics from the University of Oxford and is the author of Public Policy and Economic Competition in Japan. So without further ado, let me turn the stage to Michael, who will introduce our panelists today. So thank you again for joining us. Enjoy this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shin, and it's a real pleasure to be able to kick off, as was just mentioned, this seminar series looking at APEC's role in the region. Unquestionably, I think it's fair to say these are very complicated and often tense times in the Asia-Pacific region, politically, in terms of security and in terms of economics. APEC, of course, has been charged with being a facilitator for economic cooperation in the region. And there's no question that these challenges in the region have really impacted and in many ways limited some of the ambition that APEC held many, many years ago as it was established, as well as other organizations that are relevant in the region, including the G20 and including others. And some are now even questioning the value of these institutions any longer. If they can't agree any longer, what are we doing here? But it's also true that APEC is in its 34th year, and the level of activity and work in APEC, kind of going on under the surface, is as high as it's ever been. And so although it's faded from public attention, it's still valued by its members. There are hundreds of meetings going on every year in APEC. Thousands of participants are joining. So we would like to take a look today as things are being prepared for San Francisco and the big meetings that will happen there next month. What value does APEC still have in this region? Can APEC still help shape the region and its future? Is APEC actually worse for the wear and maybe its time is past? Or is APEC in fact just right for these times in particular by being a flexible way of maintaining some cohesion on economic cooperation and setting an agenda, maybe under the surface, for ongoing engagement? So I've been tapped to just provide a quick overview of APEC so we're all on the same page as to what it is and what it isn't before I turn to our my good friends and panelists today. Just briefly, as mentioned, APEC was created 34 years ago in 1989. It was a simple idea, bringing together ministers in order to discuss economic cooperation among economies that were all along the Pacific Ocean. It held its first meeting that same year, and there were 12 founding members in 1989. I think if we all look back to 1989, we can imagine what that would have been like, and very different than it looks today. The next year, there was a handful of priorities identified for work. And already the diversity of APEC's agenda was set in these early days. Trade, of course, which is commonly associated with APEC. But some of the early items were human resources cooperation, marine conservation was a topic, telecommunications was another topic. So it was a very broad and diverse set of ideas for how economic cooperation might develop. APEC was also set with several founding principles that I think are important to emphasize that shaped how it's evolved over time. Openness to new participants, mutually beneficial outcomes, consensus-based and member-driven, meaning members decide what they want to do, but only on the basis of consensus of all of the members would that actually proceed forward. And non-binding and voluntary. So APEC is not about negotiating agreements. It is about best practices. It is about capacity building. It is about principles, goals, standards that economies come together to try and develop among themselves. So after the original 12 members, 9 members joined over the course of the 1990s. So now it is 21 members in all. There are 5 from the Americas, that includes the United States, 5 from East Asia economies, 7 from Southeast Asia, 3 from the Pacific and Oceania, so those are actually Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. And I guess the other geographic region is Eurasia, which is Russia. As you see, a very diverse regions, cultures, peoples, economies, level of economic development, laws, traditions are sitting at this table multiple times a year and trying to find ways to advance cooperation. I think it's safe to say that given this kind of diversity in the region, the Asia-Pacific identity in many ways I think has really been shaped by APEC. If you think about the Pacific Rim, you think of it as a geographic area. If you talk about the Asia-Pacific, I think people tend to gravitate toward the idea of an economic common destiny, trade, supply chains, etc. And so APEC really has been a very important factor in that. Just briefly, let me cover how it operates. It's impossible to go into all of the areas that are going on in APEC. I won't even try. But I think I'll give you a sense of in terms of how complicated and deep the structure, the organizational structure has become to manage all of these different areas. You have 4 main committees. Under that, you have 30 subcommittees. And under that, you have almost 40 groups and subgroups that are meeting on a regular basis. You have senior officials who are trying to manage the process of all of that from all the economies. You have ministerial meetings, trade and finance, or regular ones, but it could be women's empowerment, forestry, transportation, energy that happen annually. And then, of course, there's the leaders' meetings, which will be happening in San Francisco as well next month. APEC has a small secretariat. It supports the work. It doesn't direct the work. But it also has an economic policy staff, and there's an incredibly rich array of publications and studies that this policy unit does that are available at the APEC website. And just to really track the progress, is if APEC has set a goal for itself of liberalizing services, is it on track to do that? And who is more on track and less on track? And actually that question is a very important part of APEC's role, which is, I think, underappreciated, which is a number of APEC economies actually look at these benchmarks, and they use these benchmarks in terms of where they are at in terms of other APEC economies to help push for domestic reforms. You know, we're behind on services, so what more can we be doing? And they really do take this quite seriously. So that does, you know, these are the kind of the quiet things that are going on under the surface. It has a business advisory group, which I won't go into. It has several observer organizations. And because the organization is so deep and so broad, it also has a glossary. So there's actually a glossary online which has over 300 acronyms defined or terms defined because it is so complex. In this way, it's a much more extensive structure than you would find in the G20, but it's not as extensive as you would find in the OECD, which of course covers the globe, but it's still quite large. Finally, let me just cover a sense of what APEC's output is. Like, what does it produce? What does that look like? If it doesn't negotiate agreements, what does it produce? Oftentimes, one category are voluntary or non-binding commitments. So just to give you one example, it could be a commitment among all the APEC economies to lower the cost of doing trade by, say, 5% or 10% by a certain year. So that means cutting the time it takes to get your products into another economy or to lower the fees or et cetera. So those kinds of commitments are an important part of APEC's work. Another bucket of outcomes is capacity building. It could be bringing customs officials together to talk about the latest ways to combat counterfeiting, for example. Another bucket of activities are exchanges of expertise and ideas. So these are really best practices type of activities. So it could be bringing economies together to exchange how they have helped advance women's economic empowerment in the region. And then, of course, there are the big visions and the goals, and that's kind of the fourth area. More recently, and I won't steal any thunder, there's been a focus more on sustainability and in the environment in terms of kind of what those goals look like. The original goal, though, for APEC, which I think it's most associated with, was set in 1994, its first big vision, which was to create free and open trade in the Asia-Pacific region by 2010 for developed economies and 2020 for developing economies. I think there's no doubt, in some ways, APEC has fallen short sort of what some of these goals. At the same time, I think it's exceeded expectations in both its longevity, in both its breadth and depth and commitment that remains very high. And even as early as 1997, only 3 years after this goal of free and open trade in the region was set, you have people calling wither APEC. There were already skeptics, only 3 years after it set some of these big goals that APEC could deliver, but it's still around today, and still, I think, churning out a lot of productive work. I think it's fair to say that because it's so flexible in many ways, it has bent but not broken, which is an important, I think, attribute in this day and time, and is able to bend. So that's kind of goes back to my original question. Is APEC really kind of even, in a way, maybe more valuable today in the current environment than some of the bigger goals that it tried to set for itself and maybe didn't completely miss. So we'll see what happens in San Francisco. We'll see how the agenda evolves and what comes out of it. Peru will be hosting APEC next year, so the focus will be south, a little bit further plane ride for some and much further for others. But with that, it's I just wanted to set the stage for kind of what it is and what the expectations are and how it's evolved as I turn to our distinguished panelists and for me, I'm happy to say, very, very close friends. Aida Alias is our Minister for Economic Affairs of the Embassy in Malaysia in Washington, D.C. currently. She has a long association with APEC. She was Malaysia's senior official, and I'm particularly happy you're here just also to see you, but also because Malaysia, during its host year in 2020, that was a very challenging year because of COVID. We started in person and ended up being a virtual year. Was charged with leading the negotiations and the consensus building to create a new APEC vision for the next 20 years. So that was successfully agreed in 2020 and is a 20-year vision. And I know she'll touch on some of the challenges and opportunities that went into that and kind of what APEC is looking forward today, but a really critical person in that process. And then I'm really pleased also to have Ambassador Kurt Tong, who currently is a managing partner at the Asia Group, but has a long career in the State Department. And I think I got to know Kurt originally when he was at the NSC for a time. He was U.S. ambassador to APEC in 2011. So the last time the U.S. hosted APEC, it was all on his plate, essentially, and was also the U.S. Consul General and Chief of Mission to Hong Kong and Macau before leaving the State Department. So let me turn to you, Aida, first to kind of focus on where APEC is today and what we might expect and what's set up. And then I'll ask Kurt to focus a little more on the future and kind of where maybe some missed opportunities are and where APEC might be able to revisit some of its assumptions and find a new and better role for itself. So please, Aida, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Aida, and I've been based in DC for 2 years now. Perhaps, well, first of all, thank you, the center, for having me. It's such an honor. Never in my wildest dream would I think that I would be sitting in a panel in such a prestigious institution. Maybe I should start by telling you about how APEC won't leave me alone. Because when I started working on APEC issues, it was 2011, and it was the year that US hosted the first time, no, second time, because Blake Island, right? So 2011 was US host year, and then that was my first stint, and then 2012 Russia year, and we did something big there that year, which was the environmental goods and services, one of the kind of a big outcome, because at the WTO that's not even possible at the time. And I left in Indonesia year, and I thought that was it. But then when 2020 was about to come, and it was like 2018, Papua New Guinea year, I was tossed back into there. And something interesting in 2018 is that there was already a group in APEC called the APEC Vision Group of eminent people trying to come up with recommendations for this eventual Putrajaya vision. So that was when I started going into it. In the Chile year, I was senior official. And then our host year, 2020, and then New Zealand year, I left because I was being posted to the United States. That was 2021. And then 2022, in February, the U.S. announced that they're going to host again. So now, actually, I'm here on the West Coast to do an advance visit for the Prime Minister and the ministers who are arriving next month. So I took the opportunity to also come here. Thank you very much for having me. So I guess I will speak a little bit about the BOGO goals, just because it's a comparison to what we're doing today with the Putrajaya vision. So BOGO goal is just like Michael said, it's a one-liner goal statement, which is free and open trade and investment in the Asia Pacific for developed countries 2010 and developing 2020. And you say something about that I wasn't very agreeable to, that they are unfinished or like hasn't. But I feel that BOGO goal is open enough, and there are other areas that outshines the other areas. Perhaps maybe if you say, there's not enough done in services for liberalization, but perhaps that's just not the will of the group. So I think it's organically good for the region of the Asia Pacific. So we'll talk about it a little bit later as we get into our drafting of the Putrajaya vision. So because it's just a one-liner, the next year is the Osaka Action Agenda, which is gives more structure and also gave birth to the three pillars of APEC, which is trade, investment, liberalization, and then the facilitation and the eco-tech. And that's very important for a country like Malaysia, because it balances out of things that we work on to liberalize trade and investment, but also it gives us capacity building for us to work on further. And then APEC also was created, I guess, in Osaka year. I mean, in Japan hosting year, which is 1995. And then another important instrument for APEC is the Individual Action Plan, which was Manila. It was produced during Philippines host year. And eventually this EVSL, Early Voluntary Sectoral Liberalization. But if you look at it, even though I spoke about the eco-tech, but a lot of things in the first 26 years, Bogor to Putrajaya, is all about the trade and investment liberalization. Yes, there are parts, that talks about inclusion and how to distribute better, connectivity and stuff like that. But, APEC used to be very businesslike and very liberalization. And in some quarters of APEC, they would say that, so many unfinished business, so many things that, in liberalization that did not happen. But I tend to differ. So inching closer to the Malaysia host year, and also the year that we are supposed to come up with like a new goal for APEC. We were already observing the themes for the hosting year, starting from Vietnam and then Papua New Guinea and then Chile. In all their themes, they would have this word future. And I think for US year, this year too, we're still talking about the future. So we could like feel the pressure, right? There was as I was talking earlier about the APEC Vision Group, and you can look it up. They have a recommendation report. We really appreciate the work of the APEC Vision Group. So it's chaired by Ambassador Alan Wagner from Peru, and it was a little bit. I'll talk about that later because of Chile hosting year is a little bit chaotic at the end, yeah. So they started work in Papua New Guinea, or maybe even sooner. I'm not sure, because there was like a time that I wasn't doing APEC work. And then during the Chile year was really when they started really coming out with those recommendation and producing a report. And for us, we were leading the process for the drafting of the Putrajaya vision. So we really took to heart some of the recommendations. And again, also what we appreciate also was that I wasn't just focusing as we were before, just not just on liberalization. There are other things, like when you're talking digital, it's not just liberalizing the digital regime, but also talk about, upgrading the skills and also upgrading infrastructure in many parts of the Asia Pacific. Like Indonesia, for example, have tens of thousands of islands, and we're talking about digital access and things like that. So it goes beyond what we were working on in APEC in the past 20-something years. So that's appreciated. Yeah, but during Chile year, and I think Chile worked a lot on this, and I was not, as a senior official at the time, a new senior official, I was very passionately and disagreeable with this, because there's a paper and all this work to talk about the unfinished business, and for us it felt like it's giving a bad taste, because we are leaving the Bogor goals. And I think as an organization, APEC has done so much. It should end Bogor goals with some good positive things, and talking about unfinished business. If the WTO right now, in the newer negotiation rounds, that's not even moving. We're even further than the WTO, and I feel that talking about unfinished business of the Bogor goals is not great. But also, if there are good things that should be continued from the Bogor goals, we will be happy. And there are things that are also meshed into the newer vision for the Asia Pacific, for APEC. And so a little bit about what was going on during the time that the APEC Vision Group, all the APEC economies are talking about the future. In 2017, or 2016 rather, a new American government administration came in that changed many external trade policies. I'm just going to be honest. In APEC, how we felt it was that a lot of issues in which the United States are leaders of, like digital and a few other things, and suddenly we're not getting that leadership anymore. So FTAP, I think, is another one. So there's a little void, but there are Australia and Canada and all that. So that's good. So that's quite a major thing that happened during this time. There's like a step back in terms of the American trade policy. And then in 2018, the height, I guess, at APEC of the U.S.-China tensions that at the end of the Papua New Guinea hosting year, there was no consensus for the leaders' declaration, and it was for us not a good thing because we're going into Malaysia host year, and we thought that this tension has always been there, but not to the point that it would result in no consensus of that major document for the hosting year. And for Papua New Guinea, it was their first time hosting, and it was like, oh shucks, you know, we were rooting for them and all that, so not great. So we went into Chile year. Everything was great. It looks like everything was gonna be productive, but then the estallido social, which is like riots, started in October. So November was going to be the Leaders Week, the summit, and that didn't happen. They canceled it. So another year went on before our hosting year that APEC did not produce a consensus declaration of leaders. So it was also a question about APEC's relevance in terms of, you know, giving signal to the global economic situation. So because we didn't have that meeting in Chile, that meeting was held at the APEC Secretariat in Singapore, and this was just days before Malaysia starts its hosting year, which was the ISOM, the Informal Senior Officials Meeting. It's a meeting where we lay out the plan for the year, the next year, and our themes and priorities. So we ran to Singapore, finished the year, and then ran to Langkawi. It's short. It's a short, like a 1-2 hour flight, but still was just running around. Then we had the very successful in ISOM in Langkawi. I think everyone had a good time. Were you there?
I was there.
Langkawi is a resort island, so it's nice. It was like you know, a prelude to what a great year it would be, 2020. But we did have the first meeting in Malaysia in 2020, which is Putrajaya. Also a good meeting. We were getting so geared up, and then March came and it was COVID, and everything was shut down, and we had to quickly turn over to virtual mode. And it wasn't easy because there is no SOP for it. APEC had always been an in-person meeting, even though we are like around the Pacific Rim. All the leaders would take the time to come to APEC meetings. It's a signal of sorts on how important the friendship at APEC is. And so so it was a panic situation for us in Malaysia. But something else happened in Malaysia before the announcement of the COVID as a pandemic. We had a government change. So we had a different prime minister, different ministers. So this was all happening, and with the COVID and everything. So very tense situation. But we did manage to change to virtual meetings. But the problem with virtual meetings is that with the in-person meeting, you will take 20 plus hours of flights. You know, from Chile to Kuala Lumpur is a long flight. But everyone is in the same time zone during the meetings. But with the virtual meeting, Chile again would be so far of a time zone than Malaysia, and then we have on the other end New Zealand, and we have to always try to be fair to the both of them. So we'd be like, one meeting will be like this time, and then the next one will be, and then because of the so many things and catching up on not having consensus for so long, and we have to do that APEC Putrajaya vision. So we have to have so many small meetings, and it's like, you know, nobody slept really during the year. And at the same time, the U.S.-China tensions, and I was finding out that time as a host, this China and Chinese Taipei situation gets really out of hand. We get calls every day from the embassy, Chinese embassy, from Beijing. Beijing would be calling our ambassador in Beijing. And it's just something that needs to be managed. So, but that's the reality. I'm sure the U.S. is experiencing it right now. And then, so the word of the day at the time is pivot. So everybody was pivoting. The private sector is pivoting. So Malaysia, our original theme for the year is optimizing human potential towards a shared prosperity. Shared prosperity, towards a future of shared prosperity. But because of COVID and because we had to pivot, so it became optimizing human, is so long. It's optimizing human potential towards a resilient future of shared prosperity, and then pivot, prioritize progress. But truthfully speaking, in terms of the priorities that we put in, the three, on trade liberalization, and then digital, and then the sustainable things, it wasn't really much of a pivot because during COVID, you know, we had this thing about shared prosperity that the U.S. was not very keen on at the time, but they are now. It became more pronounced, the need for equal distribution, upskilling, because, you know, the digital connectivity or digital use of communication and work and all that production became more pronounced or needed because of COVID. People are staying indoors, but they're connecting because of digital, right? And then, this infrastructure. I mean, everybody was online all the time. People are buying digital devices and all that. So what we planned for the year become more needed. You know, there are people there's disruptions in terms of like food and industrial goods, supply chain issues. So there wasn't much that we needed to change in terms of the outcomes of the year, but more prioritization. So eventually, on time, even though everything was virtual, we came up together with all the 21 economies with the APEC Putrajaya vision. In a nutshell, I would say it goes further than just trade and investment liberalization, or in other words, creating wealth in the Asia Pacific, but we're already also talking about the distribution or the equal opportunity to capitalize or make wealth. And also we're talking about, there's a word peaceful, which was very hard to manage because we have the US and then we have the China and then we have the Chinese Taipei, so, and also Russia at the time. Not as bad as right now, but we still had them. And they also decided for a shorter time frame, because it used to be Bogor goals are 26 years, and so 2020, and then APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040 is 20 years. It's just 20 years, and the reason for that is quite obvious because there was everything was so uncertain in 2020. We don't know whether the supply chain disruptions was ever going to go away. We don't know whether, at some point in 2020, we don't know whether there's going to be a cure or a vaccine or anything about COVID. And the other thing is the use of the word community. I think this is a ASEAN contribution because in ASEAN we have started thinking of the 10 ASEAN members as a community for a long time already. So we thought that it's a good thing to emulate in the Asia Pacific. And if we're talking about like people-to-people connectivity in the Asia Pacific, it's already, it has been happening for a long time. So we are getting to be a one community. So there are many new concepts like corporate responsibility, what is that? Biocircular. Well, at this point we were just talking about it, but and then when Thailand took over, they really have they really go into the biocircular green. In our year, when we started off, we planned our plan, but then it's a matter of priority at that time. We plan to really talk about how the environmental protection could really become a source of profit, and like industry, like a good industry. So I think it's happening right now. So maybe we didn't push for it hard enough in our year because of all the other things that was happening. But it's good that things are, Thailand really took it away, and they did a really good job. So I guess it's a long, so if I can go on and on, but I thought I would just give like the real context to how we come up with the APEC Putrajaya Vision. The APEC Putrajaya Vision is a one-pager. You can look, it's not a one-liner, but a one-pager. But it goes so much beyond, and that reflects how APEC 21 economies think about the region today, not just making profit.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aida. I think Aida's been very demure in explaining some of the real challenges that went into that year. But really, I think in that particular year, the world was changing in so many ways, and Malaysia really stepped forward, and all these new ideas came in, and in a way, it kind of extended the lease of APEC's purpose, I think, in what this new world will look like, and in going into so many different areas and so many new areas, and kind of leaving trade liberalization there on the table, but really expanding its focus in these other areas. So a great opportunity to turn to Kurt to talk about kind of what might come next, and what are some notes for APEC.
Great. Sound check, okay. So just launching into professorial mode here for a second, what we've heard is about, Michael's described an organization which is complex, consensus-based, that produces outcomes which are primarily ideas around which people have decided to take some degree of action. So it's not binding agreements, but it is creation by committee from a very diverse region of shared goals that people will work towards, and sometimes train themselves to be better able to accomplish, right? So that's APEC as a structure, with another whole political superstructure over the top of it, of leaders meeting and talking about a whole bunch of issues that don't have anything to do with APEC. right? So we got that situation. And then I thought Ida did a great job of walking through the history of where APEC started, why it was created, where it went, and the situation that it is now. And if I were to summarize the message, it is that it was created, from the US perspective, it was created to make sure that there was not this 1984 vision of an East Asian economy separate from a North American economy. And from the region's, Asian region's perspective, it was created to accelerate regional economic integration, break down barriers to trade and investment, with the goal of that being faster economic growth, right? And so the concept in the 1990s was that removing barriers to trade and investment creates growth. So it wasn't just about removing the barriers, it was about realizing the growth that would stem from that. And a lot of progress was made in the region, both inside and outside of APEC, during the 90s and the zeros, but APEC was sort of the touchstone organization that was driving the conversation throughout that process. Some of the process took place within ASEAN. Then there was the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Initiative, where ASEAN reached out to 6 other countries, ultimately just 5, because India pulled out, of creating a binding free trade agreement among that set of nations. And there was another major initiative that took place ultimately under US leadership, although it was not started by the United States, of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All these things fit together throughout the 90s and the zeros and into the teens, and with some wandering around year to year in terms of the agenda setting and what was driving the program. For example, after the attack on New York and Washington in 2001, 9/11 attacks, the US tried and failed to bring security issues into APEC. And the first time I started working on APEC was in 2006 at the White House. And we were cleaning up after the failed attempts of the Bush administration to drive security into APEC. And my initial conversations with that were with Steve Hadley, saying, we got to get out of this, pushing this, because it's just not working. What's our soft exit from doing security issues in APEC? And we got back into economics. But a lot of wandering around, but the fundamental theme up to and until 2011, when we last time the United States, the biggest economy and most powerful nation, hosted APEC, was regional economic integration with a lot of other stuff. And in 2011, it appeared that things were being put over the threshold, and a lot was going to be accomplished. That is the year when Japan agreed to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Canada and Mexico agreed to join, making this effectively into, in some ways, a more important trade and investment liberalization mechanism than even the WTO. And this came out of APEC, and the constant meeting discipline of meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and people just getting exhausted, talking themselves to death, but then finally, after a while, realizing that they did have shared objectives and that a lot of those could be realized through both binding agreements, the capacity building process, and the process of agreeing on soft goals where each economy works to achieve those individually. Unfortunately, what has happened since then is that some nations have continued to benefit from that momentum of APEC, and some nations, including the United States and China, have ceased to benefit from that because of their own obstinacy and internal politics. China has gone the communist route under Xi Jinping and is becoming a more state-owned run economy rather than less state-owned run economy. And the United States has gotten out of the business of trade liberalization and is in politics of Republican versus Democrat, both pointing fingers at each other and chasing after the xenophobic blaming of the international economy for problems with the United States economy. That's a controversial statement for those of you that follow this stuff, but it's in my belief, essentially characterizes what's happened to the trade and investment agenda in APEC. So we have RCEP that continues to exist and is thriving, and China's actually in it, but the disciplines that it's agreed to are relatively weak. And then you have TPP that is thriving without the United States. But that's, in my opinion, going to be kind of for a while, the end of the story on is APEC creating, and she used the word FTAP, Free Trade Area of the Asia Pacific. Is APEC creating that and making the Pacific into something like the European Union over time, over a long time? And the answer to that is that exercise is stalled. And it's stalled primarily because of U.S. politics, but also in some other countries where the economic disruption of technological change is leading to huge differences in income. I learned today how much Stanford professors are paid compared to like other professors at state universities. It's a big stark difference, and it reflects the yeah, right. So it's a huge gap even in academia, which is kind of a socialist kind of set of institutions. So the United States, the difference in economic well-being is becoming broader. The shared prosperity theme that Ida mentioned as a result of that. Anyways, I'm getting off on philosophical here. But APEC as an organization is now confronted with a different set of issues. And the question is, as an organization, can it move from trade and investment liberalization as its primary mission to the kind of mission that Malaysia captured in the Putrajaya vision in 2020 and do so in an effective way. So looking forward to in the coming years, and this is happening this year right now in the United States, in your state, in your region, in San Francisco, can issues like supply chain resilience, which is not really a liberalization issue, but rather an information issue, can that be captured and made more effective, more useful through coordination between economies through APEC? Green growth. There's growth and then there's green growth, right? Can APEC capture the desire of every economy to have less of an environmental impact while still growing rapidly? The primary need for that is energy transformation. Who's going to pay for it is the primary issue. And can APEC make a contribution to that question? And then there are other issues about mobility of people between economies. I think that educational coordination and cooperation between economies in the digital age is going to become a big issue. Can we have not just trade liberalization, but academic and idea liberalization through universities which are existing in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously and teaching everyone at the same time? And what are the rules for that? The main impediment to that is cross-recognition of degrees, right, and academic credentials. Is that possible within APEC? Can the very fundamental issues around women's participation in the economy be driven forward more by APEC? That's a challenge that every economy faces. Can good rules for the digital economy be achieved through APEC or through APEC-like structures going forward? Because there's fundamental problems around privacy rules, around cross-border data rules, around whether data should be held in the same economy as the person whose data it's about, or should it be traded openly? Who actually owns the data? What are the implications for freedom of information and freedom of expression? All that stuff is extraordinarily important. And then can APEC play an important role in bridging the divide between different sort of constituent groups in terms of the direction of economic policy going forward. What I mean by that is, can you have genuine public-private cooperation across boundaries, not just within economies, but across economies? And APEC is well organized to accomplish that kind of discussion. Very soft outcome, but very important if you want to try and drive things forward. So that's a pretty long list of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with trade agreements, right? So, and then there's a whole overlay of, can APEC be used usefully to help stabilize the emerging Cold War between the United States and China? That's an important objective as well. Not really an APEC objective, but APEC can be used to assist with that, and we'll find out whether or not President Xi gets off an airplane in about 6 weeks from now, 5.5 weeks from now. And that's a big question mark at this point. So I'll give you the 1-minute version of how are we doing on those things that I mentioned, right? Supply chains there's been progress, but it's been difficult within APEC, primarily because of obstruction coming from the PRC. And a lot of that, and some of that conversation is therefore shifted over to the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Initiative managed by the United States, and they've come up with some useful outcomes in that area. That's about how far it's gotten. Let's give it a C. Green growth, lots of statements within APEC, lots of statements in other forums. The IPEF may or may not have a framework that they come up with in the coming weeks for fruition in San Francisco, the so-called third pillar of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework on green growth, which may or may not come up with a scheme for attracting private sector investment into energy transformation. Is that working? I'd give it an F minus, because no one has come up with a formula yet to get businesses to spend money in unprofitable ways on green transformation. And so we need to work on this planet. If you guys have good ideas at Stanford, please speak up. Education, nothing's happened. Women in the economy, the US did great on this in 2011, and I'm personally rather disappointed that the ball has been dropped by the United States. Even though it's, like in 2011, a Democratic administration, the lack of a female leadership in senior levels of the US government in this area is maybe one reason for it, but I'm not seeing anything on women in the economy in 2023 that's useful or exciting. Digital is also kind of missing in APEC this year. There will be some statements made and some little bit of forward progress, but the United States is dragging its feet on this, primarily because the White House hates big tech, and by extension all of you in California and Stanford University. And so there's not much happening in that regard. Public-private rebuilding of relationships, I'll give the administration an A on this. The CEO summit this year in San Francisco is going to be a really good forum. There's a lot of people that are coming in, and businesses, not just American businesses, but from around the region, are getting re-excited about using APEC as a way to be in the same room with government people across boundaries. So there was a whole fabric of how, like, this private sector actor and this government person from another economy can or cannot meet, which was torn to shreds by COVID, and that's being actively reestablished by the United States this year.